Hey everybody, this is Mr. Storm, and today we're going to talk about CSS Box Model. Now, understanding the box model is really important for figuring out how to make the stuff inside your div kind of look what you want it to look like, right? We want to give our information some breathing room. And by that, I mean, let's look at the web page that I was working on last time. So I have this div up here with a background color, and that's really all I've applied to it other than some text changes and whatnot. But if you notice, my name right here is butted all the way up against the edge of the div here. And this right here, it's all the way up against the edge of the div. It doesn't really look that good, right? I would like a little bit of space there. Well, to know how to do that, we need to understand the box model. So the box model is essentially this. Inside the box, you have your content. Now the content is whatever is inside your div, your text, uh, your pictures, your whatever, right? That's your content. And then on the outside of your content, you have a border. So if I was to apply a border to my div, then it would be in this layer here, in the border layer. Now, in between the border and the content, there's something called padding. So if we add padding to our element, then it will actually give us some space between the border and the content. It'll kind of give us a nice little pad on the inside of our border where our content won't be all the way up against the edge. And then outside the border, we have what's called margin. And margin is essentially how far away your content is from the other content on the page. So it's pretty easy whenever we look at a solid example. So let's take this code here. This is a div which has these the width, the border, padding, margin, all of this stuff applied to it. I'm going to take this code here and I'm going to apply it to my top of page. I'm actually going to keep the background color. I'm going to apply it to my top of page CSS. I just want to format some things real quickly to make it look really nice. All right. And that didn't do what I wanted it to, but that's fine. So I now have my top of page class, and it has a background color, it has a width, and it has a green border and with some padding and margin around it. So let me save that. Let's go back to my page and see how different my page looks with this CSS applied. So there we go. So I've given myself a nice thick border. There's some padding around the content here, and there's a nice margin around that content as well. So let's say I don't want 300, maybe 300 is a little drastic, and maybe the green, let's see, let's do a 5 pixel solid, let's do blue. And instead of 300 pixels, let's say instead of a pixel element, let's do 80%. So it's 80% of the page. Let's save that. Go back and refresh. And that's a little better, sure. But now, as you can see, it's not really where I want it to go. It's kind of floating in the middle there. So let's do this. Instead of the margin being a set amount, let's set margin to auto and save. Let's go back and refresh. And now that's in the center of the page and everything's nice. And that blue border is a little gross. We can change that. Let's change that to a black border. I actually don't really want a border on this at all, so let's get rid of the border itself. And maybe the padding's a little much. Let's try 15 pixels. Save. And let's go back to my page. Okay, that's a little better. So now what I've done is I've essentially just taken just my understanding of borders and margin, and I've been able to really make this look really nice, right? Let's say I wanted to make this a nice header for the top of my page. What I could do is I could set my margins to 0. Come on, margin to 0. I can set the width to 100%, background color white, padding 15. Sure, let's save that. And when we go back and refresh, now it's going to cover the entire area. But for some reason, there's a little bit of padding and stuff up here that I don't like. So what I can do, how would I get rid of that? Oh, I would have to apply. So I would have to take padding off or the margin off for the body. There is a little bit of margin by default already. Let's see what happens when I do that. Margin is, let's do 0. Okay, so now that bumps all the way up to the top. Everything else down here, though, because I've applied it to the body, everything else is now gross, right? So I would want to apply a specific margin to every other div on my page as a class. But that's how you can create a cool looking header. And obviously I'd want to make it look a lot better than that, but you get the idea. I'm going to take that margin 0 off. So the box model is really important because it, now let's go back and save it real quick before I forget. And we will refresh. There we go. So the box model is important because if we start thinking about our content as little boxes, then we can really start to move stuff around and put it where we want it to. Now, this is going to be really important next Power Standard when we start talking about positioning and we start moving our objects in the page wherever we want them to go. We're not there yet, though. That's kind of advanced. We want to focus on just adding some nice content, adding some good padding around it, some borders, some margins, that kind of stuff. So we're going to focus on that. Now, you saw me do width a couple of different ways. You can specify width or height using pixels, or you can do it using percentages. I like to use percentages because what it allows us to do, for example, let's go back in here and let's set my percentage back to 80. When we set a page at a percent instead of a set pixel width, what it allows us to do is grow and shrink our web page, and it will grow and shrink that div for us based on a relative standard to the overall screen size. So this helps whenever you're looking at let's say a website on your mobile phone, and you have everything set to percentages instead of actual pixel widths, because every screen is a different size, right? And you can never specify specifically, I only want my web page to run on these specific screen sizes, right? So you have to be knowledgeable of or cognizant of the fact that people are going to be watching this on their giant screen TVs. They're also going to be looking at this on their small little cell phones. So we have to be aware that our website needs to grow and shrink with the user's screen size. So we can do 320 pixels or we can do percentages. Padding, we have to specify with pixels, but that's okay. Let's talk about, let's look at borders. So borders can have all kinds of different styles applied to them. We can have a solid border. We can just have a red bottom border, rounded borders, and all that information is here in the borders page on CSS, on W3 Schools. We can look at margins as well. Margins, we can set margins specifically for the top, bottom, left, or right of our content. We can also use that margins auto attribute that I just used, that margin auto, which will automatically horizontally center our content on the screen. Padding is great because we can also add padding to individual sides. There's a shorthand property for padding we can use. Yeah, it's basically the same as margins. And here's another way of looking at height and width. Like I said before, you can use percentages. And you can set max widths which is great because what a max width does is it allows our box to grow up to a certain size, and then after that size, the page grows, but the box stays the same. Max width is pretty great. Alrighty, and then outside of the border, so let's talk about outline real quick. Um, So outlines can be another kind of border drawn around the outside of the border, which makes the element stand out a little bit. So we have this little black border here, and then we can have another outline around it. So that's a cool styling trick that you can use. It's basically just another border applied to the outside. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. I don't want to get too much in depth here. Um, Again, this is just something extra to kind of start thinking about our web pages as boxes with different content inside of them. And if we treat those boxes differently, we can have cool looking effects on our web page and organize our content in a much more specific way. So that's it for this lesson. I'm going to be quiet now and let you get started on your box model project. And hopefully by the end of this next project, you'll start seeing your website looking really nice. It'll be looking really great. And then you can go into the Power Standard where you design a brand new website from the ground up using these cool CSS techniques that you've developed so far. All right, I will see you next time. Thanks for paying attention.